Hello, dear friends. Welcome to Spirit Reports of Life After Life by Allan Kardec. We meet every Sunday night and we discuss Spirit Reports. We're not here. I will repeat it. The important lesson that we learned last week was that it is not enough to obey by the human laws, but there is actually a higher bar for all of us, and that is the divine laws. We need to know and study the divine laws and follow them, because only then are we actually working on our inner transformation, which will help us in our transformation, in our growth, in our evolution. And so the important lesson was to not stop at the human laws, but to go further and educate ourselves about the divine laws. And today we will be looking at another average spirit. This is the category we entered last week. And this time we will be discussing the Marquis de St. He is an average spirit. And let us see, we will find him in chapter 3 of Heaven and Hell. And he is under the average spirits, and he is the spirit number 3, I believe. Yes, the Marquis de St. So here it is, dear friends. He passed away in 1860 and was evoked in May of 1861. So about a year plus minus after his passing, he was evoked at the request of his sister. And she was a member of the Parisian Spiritist Society. For those of you who saw the movie Kardec, that was just newly released, we remember the scenes when he was the president of the Parisian Spiritist Society, and we remember those scenes when he was sitting at the table with his members. And it's a very beautiful movie. Warmly recommended if you haven't seen it yet. It brings Kardec, his life, and what he brought to this planet alive. It brings it to our homes and opens our hearts to him, to learn that he too was a human being with his struggles and a beautiful wife who stood by his side. I see some friends joining. Tony, welcome. Nice to see you. And Lisa Tellis, welcome, dear friend. So nice to have you here. By the way, I switched locations, so I'm hoping that the internet connection is much better now. So again, we're talking about the Marquis de St. and you will find him on page 326 in Heaven and Hell. So he was evoked because of his sister, who was a member of the Parisian Spiritist Society. And he says, okay, here's the evocation. I'm here, he says. And then she asks, first she wants to know if you are happy. So his sister wants to first know whether her brother is now happy being on the other side. And he says, I am in the errant state, and this transitory condition never entails absolute happiness or punishment. So he says he's in the errant state, and that this transitory position neither entails absolute happiness nor absolute punishment. So let us pause, dear friends, and let us look at the errant state. The errant state is something that we probably have heard of, but may want to look a little bit deeper. And of course, what book could be better than the beautiful Spirits book that will help us understand the errant state? There's a whole chapter dedicated to that, and we find that on page 203 in chapter 6 of the Spirits book. And the chapter is labeled Errant Spirits. And so we're starting off with question 224. Allan Kardec wisely asks, what becomes of the soul during the intervals between incarnation? So what happens to us between our incarnations? And the answer from the spirits on high is it becomes an errant spirit, aspiring to and awaiting a new destiny. So we enter an errant state. between incarnations. And this is important. We'll see why. So the state between incarnations is called an errant state, and we become errant spirits. Now, Allan Kardec covers in the next almost 10 questions the following subject matter, and I'm summarizing it in lieu of reading all the questions. He's telling us about the errant state, that it may last from a few hours to actually thousands of centuries. Can you imagine how long an errant spirit can last for a spirit? So it can be really long, but it could also end after just a few hours. And the length of the errant state is a consequence of the spirit's free will. So spirits have a say in how long they're going to be in an errant state. And the determining factor is because they may want to stay to live the consequences of their past actions. They label it punishment in the Spirit's book, but we know there is no punishing God. We know that really punishment is more like a consequence, the law of cause and effect, right? But the other reason why a spirit would want to stay in the errant state is because they would like to study more and to observe other spirits and the different transitory worlds and to learn from them. They were also learning that spirits of every degree of evolution experience the errant state. So there is higher level spirits, more evolved spirits, but there's also spirits that are less evolved. So we find all kinds of different level spirits in the errant state. But only spirits who must reincarnate again are errant. So only if we are planning another incarnation, and that doesn't have to be on Earth, on planet Earth, are we labeled an errant spirit, or only then are we in the errant state. The pure spirits are not errant. So the super high evolved spirits, the pure spirits, are not in an errant state anymore because their state is definitive. They don't necessarily need to reincarnate. But of course we know that the majority of us, and of course from other worlds, will have to and will want to reincarnate for our own and their own evolution. So only spirits who reincarnate are errant. So that's important, an important distinction. And there is 3 states of spirits then. There is the incarnate spirits, which we know, which is us. We are connected to a physical body. So there's 3 different types of spirits. We are the incarnates, and we are spirits attached to our physical bodies. There is the errant spirits, and those are the ones that are disconnected from their physical form, but are awaiting another reincarnation, awaiting another incarnation. So those are the spirits without a physical body after our so-called death. We are errant because we're waiting another reincarnation. And then there are the pure spirits. And the pure spirits are perfected. And they do not need any further incarnation. Then we learn, errant spirits learn by studying past and their own past. And they seek ways to evolve by watching and observing the other spirits. And they also enroll in schools. There's lectures, there's different schools, there's education in the errant state. And so during the errant state, spirits do evolve. So spirits can improve a great deal in the errant state, we learn. And the state is dependent on their own free will, as we know, as we've heard already. The actual practice of what was acquired in terms of both moral as well as intellectual knowledge in the errant state, the actual practice of the newly acquired knowledge will only be in a corporeal life, in an incarnation in the flesh. So the actual practical application of the lessons learned during the errant state will be in a corporeal life. So then we jump over to question 231. See, we covered a lot of questions in the summary. And here Allan Kardec asks, are errant spirits happy or unhappy? Remember, the sister of the Marquis asked, are you happy? And here the answer from the spirits on high is, their degree of happiness or unhappiness depends on what they have merited. They either suffer from the passions whose essence they have retained, or they are happy according to their degree of dematerialization. So spirits who are still very much attached to matter and their passions and desires and needs that they had during their corporeal life and have retained them, they will not be very happy. But those who have dematerialized themselves, meaning they have detached themselves from the material world, they will have a happy state in the errant state. In the errant state, a spirit realizes what it lacks in order to be happier. Thus, it searches for the means to attain it. However, it is not always permitted to reincarnate when it wants to. This in itself is a punishment, a consequence of wrongdoing. So we need to remember in general that we at our state, we are co-creators with God. So we do not ever have 100% free reign in our physical choices, right? So we always have to look towards God and ideally align our will with God's will. We are children of God and co-creators, co-elaborators of God. And then let's see, do we have another question here? Where's the piece of, no, that is it. So we're understanding that there are happier and unhappier spirits depending on their merit from previous lives and depending on whether they're willing to learn more and how long they're going to stay. And that is not, yes, we have our free will and we have a choice, but it's not all in our hands. So I think we know a little bit more about the errant state, right, friends? And if you have any questions or you would like to, add something you know about it or you would like to express, always please feel free to add your comments in and let's make this interactive. That would be enjoyable. So he says, I'm in the errant state and this transitory condition never entails absolute happiness or punishment. That is his experience, his opinion. Then he says, then the question is, did it take you a long time to come to your senses, his sister wants to know? And he says, I was confused for a long time and came to my senses only to bless the compassion of those who had not forgotten me and who had prayed for me. So he stayed in the state of confusion for a long time. We may remember that the happy spirit, the more evolved spirits that we've been visiting and studying in the past few months, they all had a very short to almost non-existent state of confusion. But now we're in the category of the average spirits, so that means they're a little bit less evolved. And so the state of confusion becomes longer. He says for a long time. Now we don't know what that exactly means. However, we do know that he was evoked approximately a year after his passing. So that tells us that it's not super long, right? But he experienced it as a long time. And then she asked, who were the relatives? Oh no, can you say how long your confusion lasted? So the sister wants to have a little more information. He says, no, I cannot. So let us revisit the state of confusion. And again, the best book to learn more about it is the Spirit's book. And we're going to question 163. I know we've visited the state of confusion several months ago. It's a very important component of our process, of our crossing over to the other side. Remember, there is the state of confusion that sometimes already starts before the actual excarnation moment. It then often is during the actual process, the loosening of the ties, the final ties between the perispirit and the physical form, and very much most often after the separation has happened, the state of confusion continues and is most prevalent after the excarnation, right afterwards. So we said question 163, if you like to follow along. And we find that in Chapter 3, Part 2 of the book, The Return from the Corporeal World to the Spirit Life. And Allan Kardec asks, upon leaving the body, is the soul immediately conscious of itself? So is there a state of confusion, or is the spirit immediately conscious of itself? And the answer is immediately is not the right word. It remains in a state of confusion for some time. So we see it's a pretty common occurrence. And then we go to question 164, the next one. Do all spirits experience the confusion that follows the separation of the soul and the body to the same degree and for the same amount of time? Good question. So are we all experiencing the state of confusion after the separation of our soul and the body and at the same length? And we kind of sort of have the answer already, right, friends? But let us see exactly what is being said here. No, the answer is no. All spirits do not have the same length of the state of confusion. It depends on how evolved they are. And remember, the happy spirits had a pretty short state of confusion. Those who are already purified are almost immediately self-aware because their detachment from matter during corporeal life. So you may remember also that in one of the classes we talked about how we can prepare ourselves today for our transition. And that is, you remember, dear friends, that is our self-transformation. So if we work diligently, day in, day out, on our inner transformation, on our moral development, and that always means a sort of detachment from the material life, then we will have an easier transition and our state of confusion will be shorter. So, however, carnal individuals with impure consciences retain the impression of matter much longer. And then in the fine print, we are learning, at the moment of death, everything appears confused at first. The soul needs some time to recognize itself. It feels dazed, like someone waking out of a deep sleep, who tries to understand the situation. The lucidity of its ideas and the memory of its past return as the influence of the matter from which it has just freed itself is extinguished, and the sort of fog that had obscured its thoughts is dissipated. The duration of the state of confusion following death varies greatly. So it's different for everyone. It may last a few hours, several months, or even years. The ones who experience it for the least amount of time are those who have identified themselves with their future state during life because they immediately understand their situation. So self-transformation and education will help us to shorten our state of confusion. The illusion or the state of confusion lasts until the separation of this perispirit is complete. And only then does it realize its situation and understand that it is no longer part of the world of the living. This phenomena is easy to explain. Surprised by its unforeseen death, the spirit is stunned by the sudden change that has taken place. Those unforeseen deaths are in particular suicides and accidents, murders. But some spirits who are completely unprepared and do not have the slightest idea of what happens after their transition, after their so-called death, may also have a longer state of confusion. The spirit still believes that death is synonymous with destruction and annihilation. And since it continues to think and see and hear, it does not consider itself to be dead. The illusion is strengthened by the fact that it finds itself in a body similar to the one it just left, and it has not yet ascertained its ethereal nature. And of course the body, the spirit, sees and feels and mistakes for its physical body is the perispirit, right, friends? So there is nothing painful about the state of confusion following death for moral individuals. They are calm, and their perceptions are those of a peaceful awakening. However, for those whose conscience is not pure, the less evolved spirits, it is full of anxiety and anguish, which intensifies as it regains self-awareness. So the state of confusion that's following the actual transition, the excarnation, most of the time, may also be, as I said, during the process and before, can be very painful for a soul because of not knowing what's going on. But even the state of self-awareness is painful because it comes with the confusion of not knowing, is this body, my body, and I'm still smelling, I want to eat, I want to do this, that, and the other. And last week we actually learned that these desires that impure spirits still have, these desires to satisfy, to be satisfied that they had on earth, actually are excruciatingly painful. Because if we just imagine for a moment, we're extremely hungry. I don't know whether any one of us has ever been extremely hungry and had no food. Just imagine, we're fortunate enough to always reach for food, right? But just imagine you can't. You still have the same sensation and you can't eat anymore, and it's still there as a spirit. You see the food. I can imagine that is a very hard state. So, but we can work on it. So that's the good news, right? We can educate ourselves both intellectually, through the knowledge. Spiritism is a beautiful form of education. We have lovely cardiac radio. We're so fortunate. 24/7 information coming, live streaming into our spaces, into our ears and into our brain. It is so much to learn. It is beautiful. And thank you to all the good spirits and Dr. Vanessa Anzalone for starting this amazing endeavor, for this beautiful platform where we can meet constantly in this intercontinental classroom. We're really fortunate. So we've now learned a little bit more about the errant state, and we learned a little bit more about the state of confusion, which is both things the Marquis is experiencing. So let's see, he says now, the next question his sister is wondering about: who were the relatives you recognized first after your transition? And he says, my mother and father. They greeted me upon my awakening and introduced me to the new life. Let us pause again. So we're learning that we have the capacity, or we are being granted, to meet some loved ones. And when we go to question 160, which is very close to the ones we just looked at in the Spirits book, we get a little bit more information. So here Alan Kardec is asking, does a spirit immediately meet those whom it knew on earth and who died before it? So do we immediately meet our family members, our loved ones? And the answer is yes. However, depending on the affection they had for one another. So a family member, a father or mother even, or maybe brothers or sisters or grandparents, anyone we didn't have a very close relationship with, we may not necessarily encounter on the other side. But those who we had a loving connection with, apparently we do. They frequently come to receive it, the spirit, as the spirit strives to return to the spirit world, and they help free the spirit from the bonds of matter. So those loving spirits that we've had loving ties with come to our aid. That is beautiful to know. Isn't it so consoling to know that help is always nearby? And also for the Marquis, he had his parents who helped him. It also sees many whom it had lost sight of during its sojourn on earth. So the spirit can also see many other spirits who he or she has a close tie with. And those are spirits he or she may have lost connection with during the lifetime on earth. Additionally, the spirit sees those who are in the errant state and goes to visit those who are still incarnate. Beautiful spirits, friends, right? I'm calling you spirits. We're all spirits. That's the beautiful thing, right? We're all spirits. So we are being greeted with the loved ones, by the loved ones. And we know that from the disobsession work, that very often the loved ones, mothers in particular, appear next to the disgruntled spirit. And there is most often a beautiful transformation happening. Love heals everything, right, friends? Love heals everything. It heals our bodies, our connections. It helps us with our transition, our so-called death. It helps with everything. So then he says, to what would you attribute the fact that during the last moments of your illness, because the Marquis was sick before he died, it seemed as though you were talking with persons who had been dear to you while on earth? So now the sister is wondering, so what was that? You were talking already, to spirits, to other spirits. So what happened there? And he says, before dying, I had a revelation of the world I was about to inhabit. So he had a vision. He saw the world that he was about to inhabit. And he says, I was clairvoyant just before my death. I was clairvoyant just before my death. But my eyes fogged over at the moment of final separation from the body because the fleshy ties were still quite strong. And that is part of the state of confusion. See, he became unconscious. His eyes fogged over because his ties were still, between his perispirit and his physical form, were still pretty strong. But he had a moment of clairvoyance. So I'm seeing a question. How could a Tommy Lou? Hi, nice to see you, friend. Thank you for joining us. How could a spirit see their loved ones if they have different vibration frequency? Well, see, that is a good question. So first we learned that the spirits that the soul who just discarnated meets are the ones that he has loving ties with. So at that moment, there is a vibration that causes a connection. Then we've also learned that family members or any spirits on high, and we actually experienced that in No Solar when André Louise has his mother visit him. She was in a much higher world, and she came to visit him at a certain time. Now, spirits in higher worlds, and also our loved ones that are in higher worlds, for example, they have the liberty to travel and meet us if we're in a lower state, or any spirit in a lower state. However, if we are less evolved, as a less evolved spirit, we do not have the freedom to travel into higher worlds. So, since when we discarnate, spirits meet us, it can only be those spirits who we have a loving connection with, and spirits that are either on a similar level than we are or coming on from high. We also learned in No Solar, Tommy, that André Louis' father was not around. And actually, André Louis at some point wondered, where is his father? And it's his mom, I think it was, telling him that his father is in a lower state and he has not the liberty to come and visit him. So I hope that helps. So, okay, so he, the Marquis de St. Paul, had a clairvoyant moment right before his excarnation. And for that, we're going to go to, again, the Spirit's book. I think it's question 157. Let us see. Question 157 in the same chapter 3, part 2, the return from the corporeal life to the spirit life. Alan Kardec wonders about that, and he phrases it a little bit differently, but we'll see in the answer that it will help us. At the moment of death, does the soul sometimes experience a yearning or an ecstasy entailing a foreglimpse of the world it is about to re-enter? So see, that's the same thing. He's asking, can there be a moment when the soul who is about to excarnate and is in the process of excarnation, can that soul actually have a glimpse of its future, of the world it is about to enter? And here's the answer. The soul often feels that the bonds holding it to the body are loosening, and consequently, it employs all its efforts to sever them entirely. Already partially released from matter, the spirit beholds the future unfolding before it, and it enjoys the spirit state beforehand. So during this transitional state, the death part, the passage they call it also, the soul feels the link between the perispirit and the physical form loosening, and at that moment there may be the experience of a clairvoyance, seeing all of a sudden like a preview of what state what world, what state the spirit will be entering. It was about a year ago that I was privy to one of my clients. I do in-home care for the elderly, among other things. And one of my clients was in the excarnation process, and I was blessed to be around him. And for, I want to say, several days, he went in and out of states where he would actually talk, and his eyes were closed, and he would mock hug other people. He would reach out with a big smile, and he was talking, and he was hugging, and I could just literally see all the spirits who were preparing and helping him in his transitional process. I'm getting chills. It was a very special thing. If you ever have an opportunity to be involved in the passage, in the transitioning, and it's not someone that you grieve over. It's different when it's a client of yours and not your child or a close family member. Then you can actually really enjoy what a beautiful situation it can be. So anyway, okay, let's go back to the Marquis. His sister is now wondering why in the moments before his passing, why did his memories involve those closer to his childhood? So why did he remember in those moments, those spirits and moments that were closer to his childhood? And the answer is because the beginning of life is much closer to the end than is the middle. We have to kind of imagine life like a cycle, right? Like a circle. So we start here being born, then we travel all the way around, and then here we are in our excarnation process, right? So we're much closer to the beginning of life than, let's say, to the middle of life. And consequently, apparently, the memory reaches there much more easily. Let's see, is there anyone else? Yes. Yeah, you've seen this many times, Lisa, right? Yes, it's wonderful on my job, yeah. So we could talk about that. Yeah, it is very, very interesting. I feel very blessed to have had this opportunity. So yeah, so it's much easier to remember scenes and people from the beginning of life. He says, how so? And the answer is, I mean that as if in a consoling mirage, those who are dying remember and see their purer and younger years. And here is the small print. It is probably due to a similar providential reason that the elderly, as they come closer to the end of their life, sometimes have a precise remembrance of the tiniest details of their earliest years. Same thing, right? Of those of you who have elderly parents or are working with the elderly, the memories always go back to the childhood. It is magical how even those who have dementia, they have such a good memory of events and situations in their childhood, and you may have observed, or I have observed, that there are, however, memories that must have really imprinted themselves deeply into their souls because they repeat themselves, always the same memories. So it's also very magical. But here we're learning that something similar happens right before our passing. When referring to your body, why do you always speak about it in the third person? So he must have spoken about his body before his transition in the third person. And the answer is because I was clairvoyant, right? So he already felt his ties loosening, and he was already seeing where he was going. As I have already stated, and I clearly sensed the differences between physical and mental conditions. So since his ties were loosened so much, he could tell that he, as a soul and perispirit, were already distanced from his physical form, and that's why he talked about his body in the third form, in the third person. These differences, linked together by the vital fluid, become highly distinguishable to the eyes of dying persons who are clairvoyant. So those who have this clairvoyance, they feel themselves not one with their physical form anymore. in the small print, Alan Kardec adds to this particular occurrence, this is a unique particularity presented by the death of this man. During his last moments, he would say, he is thirsty and needs something to drink. He is cold and needs to be warmed up. He has pain in this or that part, etc. And when someone would say, but it is you who are thirsty, he would respond, no, it's him. This displays the two existences perfectly. The thinking itself is in the spirit, not in the body. The spirit, when partially detached, regards the body as a separate individuality, and rightly said that it did not belong to him. Thus, it was his body that needed a drink and not his spirit. This phenomena may also be observed sometimes in somnambulists, so in those trance states. It is another case, a friend of mine excarnated, and he suffered from cancer, and he displayed exactly the same thing. It was actually for days, maybe even over a week, that he would talk about his body in the third person. Yeah, that was also. So Alan Kardec says this is is a unique situation for this particular spirit. Since I've experienced it with another spirit, I would say it's not only the Marquis who had this experience. It may not be as common as other situations, but it does exist. It does exist. So then he asks, she asks him, what you said about the errant state of your spirit and the duration of your confusion implies that you're not very happy. And yet your qualities as a person would indicate quite the contrary. Moreover, there are both happy and unhappy spirits in the errant state, right? And so his sister is still kind of wondering, is he happy? What's going on? And he says, I'm in a transitory state. Human virtues are assigned their true value here. This state is certainly 1,000 times more preferable than that of my earthly incarnation. Interesting. But I always aspired to what was truly good and truly beautiful, so my soul will not feel satisfied until it soars up to the feet of the Creator. So he gives a very almost poetic answer, right? It's a philosophical answer, that he's in a transitory state. The errant state is transitory. The errant state is always before another incarnation, between two incarnations, and that he says, human virtues are assigned their true value here. It's a time of reflection. So he can see what are the true values, what are the human virtues. And he's probably reevaluating his life on earth, and then learning of what the virtues are and where he is measuring up and where he is in that. And then but he does say that he is a lot happier than during his earthly life. And he also says that he's not done striving, because he spent his life always seeking beauty, always seeking for more, the truly good. And he is indicating that he's seeing that he's not quite there yet, but he will soar up to the feet of the Creator, and eventually he will, and eventually we all will. And that is the beautiful thing, because we have a loving God, a loving, forgiving God, who is always giving us another opportunity and more time to do our work, our inner work. So let us see, Tommy, what about dreams? Are we at the spirit world when we dream? Yes, we can go. There's intelligent dreams. There's an intelligent sleep, let's put it this way, where we visit different worlds and different spirits and different situations, and we do different things. We can actually ask before we fall asleep in our prayers, setting our intentions, what we would like to do in the spirit world during our sleep, because our perispirit is free to travel. Our soul and perispirit are free to travel during our sleep state. We will always be connected to our physical form with a silver cord, with a cord, not necessarily silver cord. I think André Louis coins it the silver cord at some point. But we can visit the spirit world in different forms and shapes and have different experiences. My prayer every night is always to please either allow me to be of service or to go to any school where I can learn more about my inner transformation so that I can take this information back into my daily life. Yes, there's actually several situations in the André Louis books where meetings in the spirit world take place. And the interesting thing is like when the spirits all gather during the meeting, André Louis describes, you can really tell the spirits who are still incarnated because they have this cord hanging onto their perispirit, which connects them to their physical bodies during the night. Whereas the excarnated spirits don't have that, obviously, because their physical form is no more. All right. Yes, you're right, Tommy. Dreams seem very, very real. Sometimes shockingly real, right? So, dear friends, let us close our eyes if we can at this very moment, and let us connect with God. The beautiful God, the first cause of all things, the benevolent, loving, forgiving God. And also let us connect with Jesus, our guide and model. And let us also connect with our own spirit mentors and the mentors of this study group. And let us ask them let us thank them for the beautiful work that they're doing, allowing us to educate ourselves, to prepare ourselves, not only to live this life in a more concise, in a more loving, kind, benevolent, and forgiving way, but also to prepare ourselves for our future, for our own transition, which will happen one day, to help us to reintegrate in a more smooth and conscious way into the spirit world. And we are reminded and praying for those spirits who were not able to see the beauty in this life, the fact that there is blessing in disguise when suffering knocks on our doors, those spirits who couldn't bear their life, their challenges, their pain any longer, and decided to cut short their time on earth. We're praying for them. We're praying for them to understand that there is blessings in suffering, to understand that there is always another opportunity, always another step towards the divine. And we're asking the spirits on high to please assist those spirits on their path to understanding. And for the week to come, we're asking for support in our inner transformational path. And with this and so much gratitude in our hearts for Kardec Radio and all the good spirits that are traveling with us on this path called life, we're asking humbly for permission to close our study session tonight. And so be it. Thank you, dear friends. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for being here. Many blessings. And so God willing, we will meet you again next week, 6 p.m. with another average spirit. God bless you. Good night.